So what I'm specifically going to talk about is findings from a research study that we conducted with parents and children living with epilepsy. And I suppose the issues that I'm going to present from that work today related to, well, what did families talk about? So what epilepsy-related conversations took place? This was about, well, with inside in the family home or actually outside, talking about or telling others about the child's epilepsy. What things kind of, I suppose, impacted on or hindered or stopped people from talking about it? What things actually helped? And then I'm going to introduce a new resource that we have developed. It's a website resource for families of children with epilepsy, and then just some final thoughts as well based on that work. So this slide here just illustrates, I suppose, all of the kind of things that families said that they spoke about and related to epilepsy. I'm just going to briefly go through each in turn. So the first thing was that I suppose families, and particularly parents and children themselves, understood that the important role of parents as teachers or educators of children about their epilepsy and about their seizures. This was the primary, I suppose, source of where children learned about their epilepsy. And as I suppose Brian Lynch spoke about this morning, key questions that children said that they had or wanted answers to was about why their epilepsy had occurred, what triggers their seizures to occur, and really about the issue of cause, so what the cause was and what the prognosis was. So what kind of was, I suppose, the potential plan for the future. And very specifically, children wanted to know about, and parents themselves, what about this specific type of epilepsy or the specific type of seizure, which sometimes you talk about as even was mentioned this morning about epilepsy, but there's so many different types, that was sometimes a particular issue, is understanding their own specific condition. And related to that, this was particularly for children, really had lots of questions about the appearance of their seizures. So not knowing how their actually seizures appeared to others and how that looked, and that was really important. And sometimes that was difficult or challenging for parents to kind of, I suppose, not only talk with children, but how to actually, have a video of it and actually show them what they look like in a seizure. Was important. Obviously, a lot of conversations were around epilepsy-related, I suppose, issues such as clinic appointments, seizures, and understandably medications. The majority of conversations that parents and children spoke about was about their medications. And this was one thing that sometimes could have caused some conflict or some upset, particularly between the conversations between the parent and child, if, say, particularly for the older aged adolescents who may have now responsibility for taking their medications but may not have taken them, in time, or may have missed a dose, and parents sometimes, would be checking, with the adolescents if they've taken them, and then children would say, well, I feel they're overreacting or overprotecting by checking on me, all the time about my medications. This then probably led to something that was also mentioned this morning, is that a lot of time, particularly if children were seizure-free for a long period of time, started then to ask questions about, or the challenge or difficulty of why, you're still taking medications. And how long would they have to be, go through a seizure-free period before perhaps you think about, weaning medications. And then also speaking about growing out of epilepsy and if that was, a possibility or not. Parents themselves spoke of the uncertainty around that, but also of the challenges of being cautious, in what kind of, I suppose, you spoke to children or young people about that without kind of giving, I suppose, false hope that that might be something that may or may not happen. But interesting about parents and children that took part in the study relayed kind of the need for offering reassurance and seeking reassurance. And particularly for parents, I suppose, they wanted to kind of offer reassurance to the child that, everything was being done that was possible to do in relation to trying to find the right medications, in relation to actually trying to, minimise side effects from those medications, and also just to make, to try and achieve as much seizure control as possible. But parents also spoke about seeking kind of reassurance from their children, and this kind of relates to the whole kind of thing about taking medications as well, and about, you know, managing lifestyle issues, in that parents would be worrying about, you know, the child or the young person. So they were kind of seeking this reassurance from children themselves about their self-management for their own, kind of to minimise their own anxiety. A particular challenge for families was obviously not only communicating within the family, but talking to other people about the child's epilepsy outside the family. And sometimes we refer to this, and this is some of our work that was called disclosure, so disclosing your epilepsy condition to others. Obviously, because this is a, you know, a concern for families, it was something that was talked about quite a lot within families as well. And it was something that children sought a lot of, you know, support around in relation to, you know, how do I tell my peers, you know, about my epilepsy, or who do I tell? And I suppose a lot of this was directly related to others' perceptions of epilepsy. So what children or the parents thought, well, how will other people, you know, react, or what are other people's perceptions of what will happen if I tell them that I have epilepsy? There was a great concern among children that, I think it was mentioned this morning as well, that there would be over-restriction of their activities. Particularly whether that was at school or in sports, as particularly if they're interested in that. So therefore they had concerns about, you know, perhaps telling coaches or other people about it. The majority of parents and children that spoke, however, about telling others about their condition actually spoke very positively about how other people reacted in doing so. So even though a lot of families spoke about all of, you know, the different conversations that they had both within the family environment and outside of it, they also spoke about things that perhaps, you know, hindered or stopped them sometimes from talking about epilepsy. Most of all of the families talked about their desire for normality, and this means just for epilepsy being part of everyday life, and for not wanting their child to feel any different, or for others to make their child feel any different. And this sometimes impacted on, you know, having conversations or talking about epilepsy. And this was particularly made, I suppose, easier or facilitated by what was even mentioned this morning, this kind of hidden or invisible nature of epilepsy, in that unless, you know, the child has a seizure, you know, a visible seizure in front of somebody else that somebody actually witnesses, or unless you tell somebody else that you have epilepsy, or that there's cues picked up that somebody sees you taking medication or something, then epilepsy is not necessarily visible. And actually children that, you know, they would have, or peers that children would have told about their epilepsy, sometimes found that actually hard to understand, because they said, well, you don't look like, you know, you have, you know, anything kind of a condition or anything. So it was hard for them to even understand or contemplate what epilepsy was. And this related to the complexity of epilepsy, and it related to what children or parents would talk, their specific type of epilepsy, really understanding that and understanding the complexity of epilepsy as a medical neurological condition was sometimes hindered being able to talk about epilepsy to other people. And this was made difficult as well by perhaps lack of information or lack of knowledge about the specific epilepsy type. A specific concern, I suppose, about from families was that the anticipated negative reactions that other people would have. And this sometimes was kind of, I suppose, anticipated from what was seen, perhaps seeing in the media, perhaps even historic, you know, kind of understandings of epilepsy that were spoken about by Kevin this morning. And also, I suppose, one of the biggest difficulties was actually coming to terms with actually the diagnosis. So parents spoke about, and this probably relates to the concept of readiness, being ready to actually communicate and talk about epilepsy. And sometimes a lot of the time you have to, parents spoke about having to digest and understand, you know, the condition themselves, accept it, come to terms with it, before actually you can actually talk to other people about it. It seems that a lot of the similar things that actually prevented people or stopped people from talking about it, actually the benefits were pretty much the same concepts came up as actually helping as well. But I suppose top of the list was probably ensuring the child's safety and well-being. And often, even from what I talked about, the concept of normality, wanting, you know, just to kind of continue in everyday life and normal activities and not hinder these, but also on the other side of that is thinking about, you know, children's safety and well-being. So in what context is it important to perhaps talk about it or to tell other people about the condition? And a lot of the time, ensuring that children's safety, then parents and children spoke about, well, actually, it's my opportunity to educate people as well in terms of what to do if I have a seizure. And also not just from what to do in that specific instance, but actually educating and talking, make a kind of, I suppose, from a generous perspective in terms of what epilepsy is. Being knowledgeable and having good information about epilepsy, and the particular epilepsy type or seizure that your child has, was deemed as essential, not only for talking to other people, but also children reported that they're more likely to ask their parents questions if they know that if they perceive that their parents have a high level of knowledge and information about epilepsy. Support from others was extremely important, and I think there was kind of mention or the talk about, and even being here, today, peer support or support from other parents, even children talking about support from other peers, and particularly here when they have epilepsy as well, to be able to talk about and to share similar experiences. Getting used to the same as coming to kind of terms with the diagnosis. Obviously, once you come to terms with the diagnosis, and parents and even children, they themselves have become comfortable with it themselves, that they now are able to become comfortable with talking about others. And there was a lot of conversation, a lot of talk about public awareness and media coverage, which obviously quite a lot of work has been done over the last number of years in terms of public awareness of epilepsy and coverage in the media. And this was deemed extremely important in talking about epilepsy with children. So the findings of this study, what we tried to do, because a lot of the time when we do research, and our outputs end up in published papers, on kind of for our academics on I suppose in published journals. So one of the things that we want to do is try and translate some of the findings that we learned from the study. And what we did, we've developed this website which is openly accessible. It's called Talking About Epilepsy. And it says it is a resource specifically for parents and children living with epilepsy, but actually it is for health professionals and other anybody else that's actually involved in caring for people with epilepsy, because what it does is we've kind of translated some key messages. So what are the experiences of children, what did they tell us, and we've tried to translate it into kind of some stories. So we've broken it up to different age groups, starting from 7 to 9 year olds, and then 10 to 11 year olds, and then 12 to 16 year olds. So we've kind of broken the messages down. The messages are similar, but they're presented in different ways for different age groups. And there's also a page for parents. So we've taken about 4 key messages for each age group, and we've given them. So it's not to say and to give you prescriptive information. It's not about epilepsy. It's not about the medical condition, but it's about thinking about if you wanted to tell a friend about your epilepsy, this is a story about another child who has done that, and this is their experience of how they have done it. As well as text-based information, it has podcasts, so the information is presented, so you don't actually have to be able to read it. You can actually just listen to the different various stories as well. And also there's some commentaries there from health professionals. The website itself was designed and developed through a community of what we call a community of practice, so with epileptologists and with parents and children themselves. And part of this research we worked with collaborators on the project were Temple Street Children's University Hospital. So just some final thoughts. I think it's important to say that families talk about epilepsy in many different ways, and there's no one right or wrong way. It might not always be easy. You need to feel comfortable talking about epilepsy, and one way to do that or to think about it is to think ahead and to kind of prepare for that and to practice. That is both for perhaps parents and children having a conversation together, but also perhaps preparing children to have a conversation with somebody outside the family home. Some key things to think about, and I think perhaps these are the key questions that you might work through in terms of what you think about your decision making and process, is the why, what, when, to whom and how. So if you know the rationale or reason for, well, why is it that I want to, or what is it that I want to have this conversation about, then that will lead you to understanding what I need to say, how am I going to say it, when am I going to do that, and prepare. And parents also spoke about the kind of pros and cons of, and this was particularly probably disclosing or telling other people about it. So I've got to weigh up. So for example, am I really concerned about the safety of my child, or am I concerned that really I don't want them, to be treated differently in this situation? Is that going to be an issue or a problem? And I think it comes back to that issue of as well seeking help and advice. And hopefully our next sessions here today are going to be able to answer and offer some advice to any questions that people have from your epilepsy nurse specialists. And if you feel that you're treated fairly in any context or situation, obviously Epilepsy Ireland and other supports are also available. So I hope I haven't probably gone too fast now. I was worried about time. And just acknowledge all of the research team that worked on the project behind this, and also particularly to children and parents that gave their valuable time to research, from which we've learned so much, and also the funders, which include Epilepsy Ireland and the Health Research Board of Ireland. Thank you.